Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for being here today. The Practical Talent Solutions team is delighted to have you here to walk you through our behaviorally anchored rating scales, otherwise known as BARS, project. So, on the agenda for today, we'll start with a quick introduction to the Practical Talent Solutions team, followed by walking you through the best practice BARS development steps. Then we'll talk through the steps that we used to develop BARS on this project. Next up, we'll talk about shortcuts and justifications for those, followed by research materials, then data analysis, results, team member contributions, and we'll wrap it up talking quickly through our references. So with that, we have the Practical Talent Solutions team. Speaking right now is Lawrence Dulski. My photo is in the middle here, and I am joined by my colleagues, Brandon Salazar and Turner Caldwell. Practical Talent Solutions was founded in 1990 and we're headquartered in Manhattan, New York. We have a team of about 500 employees worldwide, and we offer state-of-the-art consulting and BARS implementation services. Now we'll get to those best step practices for BARS development that we talked about. In step 1, you'll want to gather SMEs and have them generate critical incidents. Harris and Kell recommends 10 SMEs at a minimum, but usually more are required for ideal best practice. However, Casio and Aquinas recommend that SME panels can only consist of 6 to 10 SMEs. Most importantly, SMEs should represent the job or group, and the complexity of the job should also be considered. Next up is step 2. In step 2, we put critical incidents into a common format and run a thematic analysis to determine the performance dimensions that underlie the incidents. This step involves an inductive approach, where the critical incidents themselves are used to determine what performance dimensions will be utilized for the creation of the BARS. This ensures that all critical incidents are in a common format prior to proceeding. Next up is step 3. In step 3, we will do the process of retranslation. In this step, behavior statements are sorted into their respective performance dimensions. In an ideal BARS creation study, one group of SMEs creates critical incidents, another group sorts them into performance dimensions, and a last group rates them and places the behaviors on the anchor points. In step 4, we'll compute agreement statistics to determine whether the sorted behaviors match the performance dimension they have been placed in. There are a number of ways the steps can be done, but Kell suggests using a simple, predetermined proportion of SMEs who agree regarding your agreement cutoff. Jumping to step 5 now. In step 5, a third group of SMEs rate the behaviors within each performance dimension using the BARS anchor scales. According to ideal best practice, the group rating the effectiveness of each behavior should be different than the SME group that created the critical incidents and the group that sorted the incidents into the performance dimension. In step 6, the mean effectiveness and standard deviation statistics are computed for the behaviors to determine the strength of agreement between the SMEs. Schwab et al. Discuss utilization of a standard deviation cutoff of 1.5, while mean effectiveness scores will vary for each item depending on the anchors they're placed on. And last up for this ideal development is step 7. In this step, the statistics generated in steps 4 and 6 will be used to determine the final order of each behavior within performance dimension, thus creating the final BARS for each performance dimension. After evaluating the statistics for each behavior, those that made the cut are included in the final BARS.
Hello everyone, my name is Turner and I will be going over the adapted steps we have taken to develop our behaviorally anchored rating scales. To begin, we selected 2 dimensions that we believe reflect the success of a Mason IO NPS student. These include time management and team communication. These dimensions are important because they are categories of behavior that lead to success versus failure in the Mason IO NPS program. Time management involves allocating appropriate amounts of time to tasks, finding more efficient ways to complete these activities, and choosing the right moments for specific tasks. Some components of time management include short-range and long-range planning, prioritizing responsibilities and maintaining organization, and setting deadlines for tasks and goals. Team communication can be defined as an exchange of information occurring through both verbal and nonverbal channels between 2 or more team members. Some components of team communication include clear communication, frequency of team interactions, and the sharing of knowledge. So step 1 of this process involved collecting critical incidents. Group 1, which consists of 3 SMEs and was assigned to assist us for the project, were asked to generate 18 critical incidents. Group 2, our team, also generated 18 critical incidents. For step 2, Group 2 utilized all 36 critical incidents to generate behavioral statements. One example of a critical incident could be failing to prioritize tasks effectively. A student often procrastinates and leaves crucial project components until the last minute, resulting in mediocre work. Converting that incident to a behavioral statement, we could end up with something like could be expected to engage in procrastination, routinely underestimate tasks, and miss deadlines frequently. So step 3 was the voting process. This is where Group 2 voted on behavioral statements. Group 2 was asked to report yes or no to express confidence in statements effectively representing their respective dimensions. Statements were included if the 2/3 majority vote was met. This leads to step 4, where effectiveness ratings were obtained. 2 surveys were conducted, one for each dimension. Group 3, which also consists of 3 SMEs, rated the effectiveness of each behavior for each dimension. For step 5, we utilized the survey data to calculate the means and standard deviations for each item. In step 6, after analyzing the calculations, we chose 10 statements, 5 for each dimension, for the final bars that exhibited low standard deviations and means closely aligned with anchor points. For step 7, selected behavioral statements were placed on their respective anchor points, resulting in behaviorally anchored rating scales for team communication and time management. Now I will hand things over to Brandon, who will go over the results as well as the shortcuts we took in this process.
Thanks, Turner. So hello everyone. My name is Brandon, and I'm going to discuss the shortcuts we took and why we took them. For step 1, we utilized only 3 subject matter experts outside our own group in order to generate the critical incidents for our project. We did this due to time, costs, and other resource constraints. Another shortcut we took was the utilization of antecedent behavior consequence survey forms instead of interviews to generate the critical incidents. Using interviews would have taken too much time, so we thought the surveys would be sufficient for collecting the information we needed to generate the behaviorally anchored rating scales without wasting too much of the subject matter expert's time. Finally, for step 1, we allowed the subject matter experts to come up with hypothetical situations in order to generate their critical incidents. We don't think it would have been reasonable to assume every subject matter expert was personally involved in situations that were below expectations, especially since everyone is in a master's program, which shows that their behaviors usually meet or exceed expectations. This shortcut was suggested by the project instructions on Blackboard. For steps 2 and 3, we decided against the inductive approach, which would have involved an in-depth thematic analysis and a retranslation phase. We thought this would take too much time and would require purchasing and using resources such as thematic analysis software, which we would not have had time to learn and use. However, Kell et al. Indicated that modified or even extremely truncated retranslation processes were allowed if necessary. So because of all this, we decided upon a deductive approach where we pre-specified the performance dimensions to the subject matter experts before they generated their critical incidents. And this deductive process was advocated by Kell et al. And McCoy from AIHR. For step 4, my group voted on which behavioral statements best defined each performance dimension, which is a shortcut because for an ideal bars generation or validation study, you would want a separate group of subject matter experts completing each step. But this was the second step that we partook in, since we also participated in the creation of the critical incidents. We did this due to time, costs, and other resource constraints. We did not use any shortcuts for step 5, but we did use a shortcut for step 6 because we used a lower standard deviation cutoff compared to what has been used in the literature. For our project, a standard deviation cutoff of 1 was used instead of 1.5. We chose 1 because we had a very low number of participating subject matter experts, a low number of critical incidents, and only 5 anchor points for each bars compared to the typical 7 or 9 that has been seen in the literature. Finally, for step 7, as I just explained, we used 5 anchor bars compared to 7 or 9 anchors, and we did this due to time, cost, and other resource constraints. Moving away from that, this slide depicts our critical incident survey forms. This form is a standardized antecedent behavior consequence form with an example to help the subject matter experts generate their critical incidents. This allowed us to ensure the critical incidents were in a common format before generating behavior statements. This next slide depicts some screenshots of the Google Forms survey we created so that Group 3 could rate the effectiveness of the behavioral statements that passed the initial voting process. We felt this was a good format for allowing Group 3 to complete this step because each survey could be completed quickly, either through a computer or via cell phone, and get results delivered in such a way as to allow statistical analyses to be run on those results. After Group 3 completed the effectiveness ratings, we ran 2 statistical analyses to determine which behavioral statements would make the final bars. We first calculated the means for each item by averaging the scores given by each subject matter expert. This was done by applying a simple formula in Google Sheets to generate the mean score for each item in each performance dimension. Next, we used the standard deviation formula to calculate the standard deviation for each item. This was also done using a simple formula in Google Sheets. In order to determine which behavioral statements would make it to the final bars, we rounded up every item whose means were either exactly a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5. If there were none, we took the items that had the next closest means. For instance, in the event that no item scored a perfect 2, we would take a 2.3 instead. Once these items were rounded up, the items with standard deviations greater than our cutoff of 1 were thrown out. Then, we choose the item that had the lowest standard deviation. In the event of a tie for both mean and standard deviation, an item was chosen at random to represent that performance dimension on the behaviorally anchored rating scale. Once this process was complete, we were able to put the winning behavioral statements onto the anchors for the bar's performance dimension they represented. We then created the graphic displayed on this slide and the next slide in Microsoft Word. This particular graphic represents the final bars for team communication. I won't read every behavioral statement, but you may pause the video and do so if you like. This graphic here represents the final bars for time management. Again, I will not read each behavioral statement, but you may pause the video and do so if you like. So that concludes our presentation, and we at Practical Talent Solutions would like to thank you for watching this video, and we hope you have a great day. But before we go, we would like to share with you our member contribution slides, which you may pause and read, as well as our reference slide.